Welcome back to Tales After Midnight. I'm glad you're here. Tonight's story comes from deep in the Appalachian Mountains, from a place where old roads still exist on maps, even though nature has nearly reclaimed them. The people who live there don't talk much about the things they've seen, and the things they do talk about usually come with a warning. Let's begin. I grew up hearing about Black Pine Gap long before I ever saw it. It wasn't a town exactly, more like a forgotten stretch of valley tucked between two ridges in eastern Tennessee. There were maybe 30 houses scattered along the hollow, a small church, a volunteer fire station, and a gas station that seemed permanently stuck in 1997. Most people passed through without noticing it existed. The locals preferred it that way. My grandfather lived there his entire life. He knew every family, every dirt road, every abandoned logging trail hidden in the mountains. When I was a kid, he used to tell stories while sitting on his porch in the evenings. Stories about floods, stories about coal camps, stories about moonshiners. But there was one place he never liked discussing, a place called Old Widow Road. The road wasn't really a road anymore. It had once connected Black Pine Gap to another community on the far side of the mountain. Decades ago, a landslide destroyed part of it. The county built a new highway route and abandoned the old one. Nature moved in quickly. Trees grew through cracks in the pavement. Brush swallowed entire sections. Eventually, the road became little more than a scar winding through the forest. Whenever I asked my grandfather about it, he always gave the same answer. Don't go up there after sunset. That was it. No explanation, no ghost stories, no dramatic warnings, just those 6 words. As a teenager, I assumed it was local superstition. Every Appalachian town seemed to have a road people avoided. Old Widow Road was ours. Years passed. I moved away. College, work, marriage, life happened. Then, when I was 33, my grandfather passed away. I returned to Black Pine Gap for the funeral. After everything was over, I stayed an extra week to help my grandmother around the property. One evening, while cleaning out an old storage shed, I found a faded photograph. The picture showed my grandfather standing beside a pickup truck sometime in the late 1970s. Behind him was a rusted road sign, Old Widow Road. I stared at it for a long time. Later that night, curiosity finally got the better of me. I asked my grandmother why Grandpa hated that road. She looked up from her coffee. For a moment, I thought she might answer. Instead, she simply said, "Because he went up there once after dark." Then she changed the subject. That answer bothered me. The next afternoon, I drove out to see the place myself. The entrance was easy to find, a narrow opening between 2 walls of forest. The old pavement was still visible beneath decades of leaves. It looked abandoned, harmless. I parked and walked a short distance. Birds sang overhead. Sunlight filtered through the trees. Nothing felt unusual. I almost laughed at myself. This was the road people feared. I turned around and headed back. Then I noticed something strange. There were no animal tracks. Not a single one. No deer prints. No raccoon tracks. Nothing. For nearly half a mile, the soft dirt beside the road was completely untouched. At the time, I dismissed it. Looking back, I shouldn't have. That evening, I mentioned the missing tracks to a local man named Harold Baker. Harold was in his 70s and had lived in Black Pine Gap his entire life. When I brought up Old Widow Road, he became unusually quiet. Then he asked a question. "What time were you there?" I told him around 3 in the afternoon. He nodded. "That's fine." I asked what he meant. He took a sip of coffee. Then he said something I still remember, word for word. Animals know when to leave before dark. I laughed. Harold didn't. The next day, I decided to go back. Not because I believed anything, because I wanted answers. I arrived around 6 in the evening. The sun was beginning to sink behind the western ridge. Long shadows stretched across the road. The forest felt different than it had the previous day. Quieter, not silent, just restrained, as though everything was waiting. I walked farther this time, nearly a mile. The road curved around the mountain and descended into a narrow section of valley. That was where I found the gate. An old steel gate blocked the road. It wasn't locked, but someone had painted words across it in white letters. Turn back after sunset. The paint looked fresh, not decades old. Fresh. I stood there staring at it. Someone had gone out of their way to leave that warning. For whom? Tourists didn't come here. Hardly anyone even knew the road existed. The sun dipped lower. A strange feeling settled into my stomach. Nothing dramatic, just the sense that I should leave. So I did. I returned to my truck and drove home. That should have been the end of it. Instead, I couldn't stop thinking about the gate, the warning, the missing animal tracks. 3 nights later, I made a decision I regret to this day. I went back after dark. I parked near the entrance around 10 p.m. The moon was nearly full, bright enough to illuminate the road. I carried a flashlight, but rarely used it. The moonlight seemed sufficient. At first, everything appeared normal. Then I noticed the sound. Footsteps, not behind me, not ahead of me, off to my right. Somewhere in the woods. They matched my pace exactly. Step, step, step. Whenever I stopped, they stopped. Whenever I walked, they walked. For nearly 15 minutes. I told myself it was a deer, a bear, anything rational. Then the footsteps moved closer. I could hear leaves crunching, branches shifting. Something large was paralleling me through the trees. I shined my flashlight into the woods. Nothing. The moment the beam entered the trees, the sound stopped. When I lowered it, the footsteps resumed. That was enough for me. I turned around, and that's when I saw it. Someone was standing on the road behind me, about 80 yards away, tall, thin, completely motionless. I couldn't make out details, just a silhouette. For several seconds, we stared at each other. Then the figure stepped off the pavement and disappeared into the trees. I didn't wait. I headed back toward my truck. Fast. The footsteps followed again. Always in the woods. Always matching my pace. Never rushing. Never falling behind. Just keeping up. Like an escort. Or a shepherd. Halfway back, I noticed something else. The forest had gone silent. No insects. No owls. Nothing. Only my footsteps. And the footsteps beside me. When I finally reached my truck, I got inside and locked the doors. The relief lasted maybe 5 seconds. Then movement caught my eye. Across the road, at the tree line, the silhouette stood there again, watching. Moonlight revealed its shape more clearly. It was far taller than I first thought. At least 7 feet, maybe more. Its arms hung unnaturally long. I started the engine. The headlights flashed across the trees. The figure vanished. I drove away immediately. The next morning, I visited Harold Baker. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded slowly. Then he said, "You crossed the road after dark." It wasn't a question. I admitted that I had. He sighed. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, he told me the story. According to Harold, generations ago there had been another settlement beyond the mountain. Small, remote, connected by Old Widow Road. Over time, people began disappearing while traveling between communities after sunset. Nothing dramatic. One person every few years, then another, then another. Never enough to create panic, enough to create a pattern. The locals developed a rule: travel before dark, wait until morning, never use the road at night. Eventually, the settlement beyond the mountain vanished. Families moved away. Buildings collapsed, but the rule remained. People stopped remembering why. They only remembered the warning. I asked Harold what he thought was out there. He shook his head. I don't think that's the right question. What is the right question? He looked toward the mountains, then answered, why does it stay on that road? I never got a better explanation than that. I returned home a few days later. Life moved on. Years passed. Yet I still think about Old Widow Road, especially one detail. The footsteps never tried to catch me. Whatever was in those woods could have closed the distance easily. Instead, it simply accompanied me, as though enforcing a boundary, as though reminding me I wasn't supposed to be there. Sometimes I wonder how many old Appalachian rules began that way, not with folklore, not with imagination, but with experience repeated often enough that entire communities learned to adapt. Don't whistle after dark. Don't answer voices from the woods. Don't use Old Widow Road at night. Maybe the reasons get forgotten. Maybe the warnings survive, because forgetting them entirely would be a mistake. Either way, I know one thing. If I ever find myself back in Black Pine Gap again, I won't be driving that road after sunset. I want to be upfront about something. I'm not the kind of person who scares easily. I've spent nearly 20 years working as a survey engineer. My job has taken me into abandoned mining areas, remote mountain forests, flood-damaged communities, and construction sites that most people would never willingly visit. I deal with measurements, coordinates, elevation changes, hard facts, not ghost stories, not folklore, not superstition, which is exactly why what happened in Monroe County, West Virginia, still bothers me, because I can't explain it. 3 years ago, my company won a contract involving a series of bridge inspections in remote Appalachian communities. The project was expected to take about 10 days. Because the locations were spread throughout the county, it was easier to stay locally rather than drive back and forth from the nearest city. A property manager arranged a rental cabin for me. It sat at the end of a gravel road about 20 minutes outside a community called Pine Hollow. The cabin wasn't old. It had been built sometime in the early 2000s. 2 bedrooms, small kitchen, wood stove. Nothing unusual. The nearest house was nearly half a mile away. Beyond that was nothing but mountains. The first few days were completely normal. I spent my mornings conducting inspections. My afternoons were filled with paperwork. Evenings were quiet. I would make dinner, watch television, and go to bed. The isolation was actually pleasant. After years of staying in noisy hotels, the silence felt refreshing, at least initially. On the 5th night, I woke up around 2:30 in the morning. No particular reason, no strange dream, no unusual sound. I simply woke up, wide awake. The cabin was completely dark, the kind of darkness you only find in remote mountain country. I glanced toward the window and immediately felt something was wrong. The motion light outside had activated. Someone was standing in the yard. At first, I thought it was a deer. Then I realized deer don't stand upright. The figure was roughly 80 feet from the cabin, tall, motionless, standing at the edge of the light. I couldn't make out details, only the outline. A person, At least I assumed it was a person. I sat up immediately. The moment I moved, the figure stepped backward, out of the light, gone. I rushed to the window. Nothing, no movement, no sound, just darkness. I waited nearly 20 minutes. Nothing returned. Eventually, I convinced myself it had been a trick of light and exhaustion. I went back to sleep, or at least I tried to. The following morning, I inspected the yard. No footprints, no tire tracks, nothing. The ground had been damp from recent rain. If someone had been standing there, there should have been evidence. There wasn't. I shrugged it off. The human brain plays strange tricks at 2 a.m. That explanation worked. For exactly 1 day. The next night I woke again. Same time, 2:31 a.m. I remember because I checked. This time I heard something. A knock. 3 slow knocks. Not on the front door, not on the back door, on the side wall of the cabin. Knock, knock, knock. The sound wasn't loud. It was deliberate, patient, almost polite. I sat perfectly still, waiting, listening. The knocking never repeated, but I didn't sleep for the remainder of the night. The following day, I mentioned it to a man named Curtis, who owned a hardware store in Pine Hollow. Curtis was probably in his late 60s, one of those mountain locals who seemed to know everyone. When I casually mentioned hearing someone around the cabin, his expression changed, not dramatically, just enough to notice. He asked where I was staying. I told him. For several seconds, he didn't say anything. Then he asked, "Have you been opening the curtains at night?" I laughed. "What? Have you been opening the curtains?" I told him yes. The cabin had large windows facing the woods. I liked looking outside while watching television. Curtis nodded slowly. Then he said something strange. "Keep them closed after dark." I asked why. He simply shrugged. I would. That was the entire conversation. And somehow it bothered me more than if he'd told me a ghost story. That evening, I closed every curtain before sunset. Every single one. I felt ridiculous doing it, but I did it anyway. Around midnight, a storm moved across the mountains. Heavy rain, strong wind, the kind of weather that rattles windows. Eventually, I fell asleep. At exactly 2:31 a.m., I woke again. This time, there was no knocking, no motion light, no figure. For several moments, I thought maybe whatever strange pattern had been happening was finally over. Then I heard it. Footsteps on the roof. Slow, heavy, deliberate. One side of the cabin, then the other, then back again. The sound continued for nearly 10 minutes, not running, not pacing, walking, as though someone was examining the structure, inspecting it, learning it. Every logical explanation failed. A bear would make noise differently. A fallen branch wouldn't move. The rhythm was wrong, too controlled, too intentional. Eventually, the footsteps stopped directly above my bedroom and remained there for what felt like forever. I don't know how long I stayed frozen beneath those blankets. 10 minutes, 20, maybe longer. But eventually, exhaustion won, and sometime before dawn, I fell asleep. The next morning, I climbed onto the roof. No damage, no tracks, nothing. That afternoon, I returned to Curtis's hardware store. This time, I asked direct questions. He listened quietly, then asked a question of his own. Has it touched the cabin? I told him no. Just noises, footsteps, knocking, the figure in the yard, nothing more. Curtis nodded. For the first time, he looked relieved. Then he told me something. A story passed through families in Pine Hollow for generations. Not about monsters, not about ghosts, about a watcher. Something that appeared around isolated homes, usually temporary homes, rental properties, vacant cabins, seasonal hunting camps, places where people stayed briefly, never permanently. The watcher never entered, never damaged anything, never harmed anyone, as far as anyone knew. It simply observed, and eventually left. I asked what it was. Curtis smiled, the kind of smile people use when they don't know the answer. Nobody ever figured that out. I drove back to the cabin feeling no better than before. Maybe worse, because now the mystery belonged to more than just me. That night was my final night before returning home. I considered getting a hotel. I probably should have. Instead, I stayed. Partly because I didn't want fear making decisions for me. Partly because I wanted answers. Around 2:30 a.m., I woke naturally, before anything happened, almost as if my body expected it. I sat in darkness, waiting, listening, watching. 2:31. Nothing. 2:32. Still nothing. Then a sound came from outside. A low humming. Very soft. Very distant. The melody was unfamiliar, but strangely calm, almost comforting. The humming slowly moved around the cabin, circling, maintaining distance, never approaching the walls, never touching the structure, just moving, patiently. Then something happened that I still struggle to describe. The humming stopped, and for the first time since arriving, I felt absolutely certain that whatever was outside knew I was awake, not suspected, not guessed, knew. The certainty arrived instantly, like stepping into cold water. Then came a single knock on the window beside my bed. Not the wall, not the roof, the glass. One knock, nothing else. I didn't look. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I didn't. Every instinct told me not to. So I stayed where I was, staring at the opposite wall, waiting. Several minutes passed. Then I heard footsteps retreating across the yard, slowly, calmly, without urgency. And for the first time in 4 nights, they never came back. The next morning, I packed my truck and left Pine Hollow. Before leaving town, I stopped at Curtis's store one final time. I told him everything, including the knock on the window. He listened carefully, then nodded, almost as if I'd confirmed something. "What does that mean?" I asked. Curtis looked out toward the mountains. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he said, "It means it got a good look." That was all. I've never returned to Pine Hollow, never rented another isolated cabin, never left curtains open in remote mountain country. And every now and then, usually around 2:30 in the morning, I wake up for no reason. The room is quiet. The house is secure. Everything is normal. But for a few seconds after waking, I find myself listening, waiting, almost expecting to hear 3 slow knocks, or footsteps crossing a roof, or a faint humming somewhere outside the window. Because part of me still wonders whether the thing in Pine Hollow actually left, or whether it simply finished observing and moved on to somebody else.